to Mary Rodwell. Mary, are you there?
I am indeed.
Well, we're so happy to have you on here. We also have a lot of people listening in who are advisors to presidents. We hope to candidates. We're putting a team of people together to help incorporate your work into policy and talking points for our candidates here in the United States. We have a treaty that we've been promoting to prevent the placement of weapons in space that the presidents of both Russia and China have introduced, that we're going to incorporate too into what we're talking about, really to prevent the placement of weapons in outer space, but it is also to bring in the truth that you're going to be sharing with us today based on the evidence of amazing thousands of people that you've interviewed, and counselors. Can't wait to hear about all of it. Mostly what I've been doing for all of this time on this show is building a package that I now see has led up to your work, which I consider to be about as important a work that's being done on this planet. It touches on every issue area and raises the consciousness of it. And when it begins to be understood and heard, it's going to open portals to brand new information that I believe is going to, well, it gives us the chance for sure to lead ourselves out of what now a lot of people believe is the direction towards our human body extinction here. So, Mary, thank you for coming on. First, just as I mentioned, we're calling you in Australia. You're in Queensland, and I know that you are a former nurse, midwife, a health educator, a counselor. You have done so much work in the national health field with different organizations and different bodies of people who are studying and researching heavy-duty research, not just in the field of health, but also that leads us to what we're going to be focusing on a lot today, that has led you from being a counselor, a hypnotherapist, a metaphysical teacher, researcher, a well-known author and international speaker around the world. Your work is just extraordinary. And you are the founder of CERN, which you'll tell us about, and one of the co-founders of FREE, which I know you'll also tell us about. So, Mary, where I'd really like to start is, and this is going to be an odd place to start. It probably should be at the end of this. But if you had the presidents of countries as your audience, if you were speaking to the United Nations, and in that audience were representatives at the highest levels of the corporate entrepreneurial structure, the highest level decision makers, and also of militaries, labs, universities, intelligence communities, space and defense organizations, intelligence communities, as well as government reps, what would be the main message or messages that you would like to share with the decision makers who are writing policy right now and making decisions for us that could help to evolve their consciousness, educate them, change the whole game, as it says in P. Larson's music that we just heard, who wrote that in Denmark? What would be your message for the people?
Well, first of all, I would say, despite the fact that a lot of the public still are unaware that we are and have been visited by many different species of extraterrestrials from all over the galaxy and seas, interdimensional beings, etc., that we are an engineered species, which, I talk about and many others have spoken about in terms of the fact that we have been, if you like, engineered, intelligently engineered, and the evidence for that is overwhelming. But apart from the most important thing is that I believe now that we are going through a massive upgrade in terms of our awareness and our abilities as a species. We are evolving as I speak. And the reason I say that is that those that have had experiences, and, this is an intergenerational one, that each generation is being upgraded rather fast now. And my reasoning for that is why I've written my second book, is because I'm seeing it in all the individuals and families and children that I'm speaking to, that are telling me not only about their interactions with these different intelligences. They say they're coming from all over the cosmos, from, the Pleiades, Orion, Sirius, and interdimensionally. And they're telling me not only do they interact with them, but they are being taught by them. There are educational syllabuses that these intelligences are using to upgrade us as a species so that we can, I believe, not only interact and become, cosmic citizens, but because we have to really look at what we're doing to this planet. And that is the overwhelming importance of this, is that, we know that at the moment, the way that we are treating this planet, the way that we're treating one another is very, very, as they say, primitive. And it's time that we realize that we're part of a galactic community. And with that comes responsibility. And at the moment, it's like giving a child, a three-year-old child, a gun, and the child not understanding what that gun can do. So they're doing a rapid, I believe, program, and we're seeing the evidence of this in terms of literally an evolution of the species is happening right now. And, the children that I'm speaking to, this is what they're telling me. And we don't understand it. The problem has been that we haven't understood why so many children are different now. And they've been given many, many names. They've been given the names of crystal, indigo children, children of light, all those kinds of things. But the bottom line is that with that comes the other side of this that we are seeing and interpreting as dysfunctional, which is what is being labeled as ADHD, Asperger's, dyslexia, some forms of autism, are actually new programs, and we're seeing them as dysfunctions. And, this is evidence that has come up. This is information that's come up, over the 20 plus years that I've been working in this field. And I originally got into it to support people that were having extraordinary experiences or otherworldly experiences. But from that was this overwhelming understanding that something major was actually going on this planet. And it started off with being told by one young lady that about these children and herself, saying that the DNA of the star kid has tenfold the amount of information, such things as telepathy, manipulation of time and space, nonverbal communication are all conscious abilities of these children and is natural. Learning skills and abilities are advanced. There are many physical alterations, she says, in their bodies to make them stronger. And their molecular structure allows the cells of the body to vibrate faster. And everything is accelerated, including their immune systems. And also the fascinating thing was that within a few years, I get two molecular biologists more or less saying the same thing. And they were saying to me, and, I quote Dr. William Brown, who's a molecular biologist. He says this: I believe the genetic modification is occurring right now in utero is actually producing a new human. The hybrids are altogether a new species. This is shown by the exponential increase in autistic, ADD, indigo children. The new genetic architecture allows them to see the world in a multidimensional fashion. I believe research would show dormant genetic regions are being integrated into the biological systems, and this is occurring in all of us to produce expanded awareness. Their brains are working faster, they have access to more information. In the classroom, learning is much faster than normal. I believe they already know what is being taught, and I'll explain what he's saying there and how they know. The intrinsic understanding of certain knowledge and information goes down to biomolecular level, where sentient activity of the brain actually takes place in the atomic structure of DNA molecules. It's transgenerational information. The information is encoded within the atomic structure of the DNA molecule itself. So it's really basically a remodeling of the genome, and ADHD is one of the new human upgrades. So what was fascinating there was that I had this qualified by another molecular biologist who also has experiences, but also was commenting on that. And she was saying, I do not believe the theory that these are broken genes is what they say about ADHD, for example, but offering a new multidimensional skills to prevent limiting and reprogramming of a third dimensional reality. It's not so simple as foreign DNA. It's a combination of genetically improved bodies in combination with souls from different places in our universe, incarnating in these improved bodies. The souls have different frequencies, vibrations, depending on their evolutionary status, and it plays a role in activation of the DNA in that particular body. I believe we also have to take into account the collective soul of Homo sapiens. So she's actually describing similar things, and I've written in more detail exactly how she understands ADHD and all these so-called dysfunctions by saying really they're new programs. And the primary reason for that is that we all are programmed into an inaccurate, limiting 3D reality, when in fact we're all multidimensional in nature, and that we've been taught just to see out of one eye instead of both eyes, in simple terms.
This is fabulous for world leaders to hear. Now we're talking about children who have, how many have you interviewed children?
I can't give you an absolute figure, but with 3,000 individuals that I've worked with globally, I would say many of them had families with children that, you know, ultimately they would talk about their own experiences, and then they would describe to me some of the things their children were saying to them, not only about talking about going up on spacecraft, what they were actually learning, and there was a whole range of fascinating things that they were actually learning, you know, on the spacecraft, or being taken to other planets and being shown things, everything from being taught about time and space, the connection they have to all sentient life, taught levitation skills. One young lady, 8-year-old, just told me recently she was taught how to fly in terms of levitation, the exact details of how she was taught to do it, and then taught how to use her third eye in terms of skills to see other beings, to understand how to communicate. She had out-of-body training, to, how to use, communication through telepathy. A lot of these children are telepathic right from the word go. They are able to not only connect with their own family, but also pick up thoughts from other individuals. I remember one 13-year-old telling me that she knew exactly what the teacher was thinking, and what the teacher was thinking and what she was saying was two different things, and it wasn't always very nice. So, this is the other thing that is really important for people to understand is these children, even in the classroom, may see the beings. One young 9-year-old told me that when she's in the classroom, that she'll see one of the grey beings next to her, and the grey beings will often tell her answers, or they'll talk to her and say, you don't need to listen to this, it's not accurate, or whatever. So when we're talking about this kind of awareness going into 3D schools, and actually knowing when information is inaccurate and when it's not relevant to them. And this is why we've got so many kids not resonating with school, not wanting to go to school, or getting really depressed to the point where they really, they consider suicide.
We have some homeschooled children, by the way, listening to the show today, and obviously this is a problem for the children that I know too. Of course, some of them are offered drugs to keep them talk about being limited, slowed down, dumbed down like we have been as adults. And now I'm thinking in the terms of the decision makers, the leaders of the world and corporations, militaries that are in office right now, who are still thinking and coming out of 3D schools. How in the world do we get this information to them? And specifically, what should they know that may help them open their minds, including in the whole educational system, which obviously needs to be revamped if children are going to go to a condensed classroom kind of institutional school? How do we get this game changed? Now, part of it is, of course, you're bringing out this information in your new book, which is called The New Human, right?
That's correct, yes.
Yes, and in your book, do you have suggestions for steps that can be taken to change the educational system, to educate the adults, again, who are making the decisions for us on this planet? I mean, if you listen to the candidates right now in this country, you can pull out some good things. I mean, I'm listening to at least Trump say he gets along fine with Putin. There's an advancement there, and thinks we should not go to wars but make business deals. I mean, it's still in that old structure. It's still at that old frequency level. Is there a way? Is there more evidence that you can present that shows that the dysfunction is not in the children here that we're talking about. It's actually, I think, in the decision-making arena. That's where I come out of being a former corporate manager of an aerospace defense company, space and missile defense consultant. I felt when I testified before the Senate and the House in this country that even as I was talking, I felt like I wasn't saying enough. And in fact, I'm one of those people who has been a closet contactee experiencer, wondering where and when I can go public with some of this information because of the ridicule factor. And will anyone take me seriously? Thanks to you and your research and the people you're bringing out, this, what was considered to be crazy, low level, we're not going to listen to this really because it's game-changing information, will now be able to become credible. But what kinds of steps can we actually take now to reach our decision makers so they don't fill up the space above our heads and close off the portals with, human-made weaponry, which is what is about to happen and why I've been working so hard with a group of people to get the treaty signed that I mentioned was introduced by Russia and China that isn't even being talked about. Peace in outer space, as I was told by a UFO conference coordinator, actually too, doesn't sell tickets. It's not even in the dinner time conversation. But here we are talking about a higher frequency of consciousness, I think is what you're talking about, right?
To give you an example of that, what we're actually dealing with in very clear terms is this. I was speaking to a lovely gentleman in the US about his experiences. His son, who was 9 at the time, said to his father, "Can I speak to Mary?" And I was a bit surprised because I wondered why he would want to speak to me. And I said to him, why do you need to speak to me? Well, he said, "It's because of your frequency." Then he proceeded to tell me that his past life was on Orion, that he worked with advanced technology, and in his past life he was a light physicist. And he explained to me that the problem was for him on this planet was not only were most scientists too behind and too primitive for this information, he said, "I have got no one to talk to where I can discuss this. The closest to my understanding is Nikola Tesla." And this was a 9-year-old explaining to me his difficulties. So this is laying it out pretty clearly. One of the 9-year-olds in Europe that I spoke to, a 9-year-old girl I call Kathy, I explained she said the schools, she said that they program you out of your light and the teachers just press the keys. Wow. Now that's her words to give you some idea of what we're talking about here. So when you talk about what do we do, I mean, what's been fascinating is the number of teachers, educators that have contacted me that say that they're recognizing these children everywhere. I even spoke to an anthropologist educator in South America who's starting up a school that wanted to talk to me, and she said, "Look, I'm working with the educational system here to create a new kind of environment for these children." And I said, "You do realize where I'm coming from, don't you? That these are, this is all related to our connection to the many different intelligences visiting this planet." She said, "Oh, yes." She said, "But we won't tell them that. We'll just say that the children now are needing this new kind of environment, this new open environment." And so I didn't expect to, but I have done. I've actually written a whole chapter on the need for new schools. And in it are teachers speaking about the children saying how they can't cope with school as it is at the moment. One talking about literally wanting to commit suicide because it was so painful going to school because none of it was relevant in every sense of the word. Now we're talking about hyper-aware children that are being educated off-world here. And this is global. This is not just the odd little one here and there. That it is all over the planet. Most of the children, when I talked to this lovely 8-year-old a few weeks ago, and I said, "Do you talk about this at school? Or do you talk to," she says, "Oh no, you can't do that because it's not safe." So the whole point is that, the educators generally will never be told this. I was speaking to a father in England who had a 10-year-old son who went to his teachers. He actually went to his teachers and he said, "You're teaching in linear fashion. I think in spirals." And what do they make of this? Interestingly, there are very aware teachers out there. Many of them have to be very careful, but they will say, look, Mary, I can recognize when this is relevant to a child, and they will often treat them differently. I've even got an account in my book of a nursery school teacher with a 2-year-old little boy. And she already knew, because of her own experiences, that he was different. And she remembers distinctly sort of being upset one day when she hadn't got enough time for him. And in her mind, she was saying, oh, I'm so sorry I haven't been able to talk to this little boy. And he answered her verbally saying, oh, it's okay, I understand. So she knew that he'd picked up her thoughts. This is what I'm talking about. There are teachers out there, but they don't have the right environment because of how they're trained or because of the educational system. They don't know where to begin. But some are trying to create a new environment. And we have schools that are alternative, such as Steiner, Montessori and what have you. But this is actually still too limiting and too limited. If you've got children that are being taught physics at 3 years old, and I recall very clearly a gentleman who was 35 writing to me, he said, I'd never heard about anyone talking about space schools till you spoke about it. I was being taught physics at 3 years old on the craft. I knew the answers. When I finally went to uni, I didn't need to learn it because I already knew it. What we're not understanding is that this is the level of education that's going on board craft. They're taken to different planets, both physically and out of body. And this is happening globally. This is not isolated cases. This is global.
As I hear you talk, I'm imagining you now in the Pentagon, where I've done briefings myself, doing an education, a new kind of curriculum for the military-industrial complex. And there are audiences that I hope you'll be reaching very soon, especially when your new book comes out, because they, too, need a new curriculum. By the way, I met you because I was introduced to you by Edgar Mitchell, Dr. Edgar Mitchell, Apollo astronaut, whom you know very well, and whom the organization is that you're working with, and you'll tell us about free. This meeting that I had with Edgar when he told me about you was that this organization was going to advance the consciousness about what you're talking in a new way, because you're going to provide evidence, where in the past it was presented at different ufology or exopolitics meetings. No, this is now a more advanced version of this information. It's the same information, advanced, because every day the information is changing. It's coming in so rapidly. And this is how he explained it to me, how it was you and your work and the people with free putting out this kind of evidence, and the new literature, as an educator myself, the new educational material needs to go across the board, across the world, as you're talking about. I had written a Spaceship Earth teaching unit where my children in 6th grade were pretending to be living and working in outer space. And I was invited to Fairchild Industries to meet the late Dr. Werner von Braun. In this country, we call the father of rocketry. And I gave his speeches for years on the vision of space hotels, schools, labs, industries, farms, things that were about to be elevators built to get us into space and to live and work and travel in space. What we were all really afraid of talking about, and there was fear involved in this just as much as there is people who are primed to think they're enemies everywhere so that the war industry can keep going based on that enemy mentality. The fear was that we would be so ridiculed that nobody would hear anything we said if we talked about extraterrestrial beings, off-planet cultures. So I'm wondering now, okay, do you have a lot of teachers that are involved with your work through free or CERN? And I also want you to get into, if you would, what the medical profession is thinking about this, as you're talking about even the genetic code changes, the DNA.
Well, at the moment, thankfully, with free, it's got a far broader profile in the sense of what free has been able to bring in. We're talking about former professors of psychology, Dr. Bob Davis, who's a neuroscientist, for example. We've got Dr. Rudy Shield, who is an astrophysicist. So we've got the scientists, and we've got, the academics, and we have got MDs on the board as well as psychologists. and clinical therapists, etc., and many, many different researchers. So this was a far broader mandate that I could have with my own organization of ACERN.
What's the purpose of it?
Well, it's the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Foundation for Research into Extraterrestrial Encounters.
Okay. All right. We're talking about the importance of the organization FREE that Mary has been working with and helped found. So this is part of the evidence that now we can present to make this issue credible as we talk about the extraterrestrial, the higher consciousness, higher frequency, the need for a new educational system, how this is going to impact the healthcare system, and our basic security. Getting this kind of evidence from Mary Rodwell is so profoundly important, and she's also going to be connecting us with other experts around the world. I think her work is vitally important to humanity, to the environment, to new energy programs and frequency. This is really an amazing compilation of information. So we're now working to get Mary back online. Not sure what happened here, but I know Danny is calling her. So while they're doing it, it gives me more time to talk. So I wanted to mention, too, since I get this moment, that having testified before the U.S. Congress, given speeches around the world myself, nowhere near as extensively as Mary Rodwell has, what I've seen is that most of the decision makers are working in that three-dimensional reality that is not at all adequate for human survival. And that's why one of the speakers that I had, Guy McPherson, was invited on to talk about what's actually happened already to our environment on the planet and to see if there was a way out of this mess. And we're talking radiation, methane, all kinds of toxic poisons that have been introduced into our bodies and into our minds as we've been kept so dumbed down. And the children have been given all kinds of drugs to slow them down, keep them down. You know about some of them if you're a parent, from Ritalin to whatever, as well as adults have been given these drugs too. So it makes them incapacitated in terms of being able to think and to discern. So this is what's going on right now on our planet. I think we've got to raise the consciousness to the level of being able to talk about the cosmos cultures, as many of us have been calling them, to present our life stories. By the way, part of mine is in a book called For the Children by Suzanne Babcock. It's available now even in Kindle on Amazon. And my story is integrated with hers and her husband, Craig's. I have now been very slowly integrating my story out there, but it isn't about me. What it's about, oddly enough, is the fact that we all have a journey that we're on. We all have a story. It's starting to happen to us in a higher frequency of consciousness. And right now is the time when these pivotal decisions are being made in the issue that I'm following. And no matter what issue you're following, you're at a critical moment in time. The one I'm following is whether or not we're going to place weapons above our heads. So in this case, what's important to me is that there's even genetic evidence of the modification that's been taking place on and maybe off the planet that we'll hear more about from Mary. This is the kind of information that is not presented on the news, on mainstream for sure. Maybe we'll hear snippets of it on alternative news. But what we have to do now is figure out the ways to get this out to the world. So as you're hearing this, I hope that you'll be able to help promote all of the books that Mary's written, and that people like Mary, that she's going to be connecting us to, all of their reports, all of this information gets out to, including the media. And we should be able to find some people in the media. If you and I are conscious enough to be listening to this, I'm sure that there are people in the media and in the whole military industrial complex who will be able to not only hear it, but integrate it into their work. What I'll tell you is a little bit more about some of the things that I know Mary's going to be talking about, and the DNA programming or reprogramming. the frequencies of our DNA are things that she's going to be able to go into more details about, because this programming is influencing the very environment that we're in. And as you know, many of us in this environment are on this whole planet, in our communities, even in our own homes, are being toxified. And not only with the kinds of things that we're ingesting into our bodies, but with the frequency of the information, which is a very low level of language and thoughts. And that's putting a lot of people into a deserved, understandable state of depression. As I say deserved, I mean because we've been unable to think our way out of the very negative, toxic thoughts that we have that are based on a reality that has put us into the state of heading for all kinds of continued suffering and destruction. But in the cosmic world, there's a whole other thing going on. And I'm not sure, I want to hear Mary's viewpoint on this, if she thinks that most of the decision makers, or even enough of them, can relate to a higher frequency of consciousness. I mean, we have people like Edgar Mitchell who have actually talked to plants from outer space, and we've seen the relationship of that high-level frequency of consciousness. Of course, Edgar studied consciousness for many years and founded the Institute of Noetic Sciences to study the new studies of the brain and the mind to bring this information forward. But still, it's not incorporated into the decision-making process, and that's my concern. How do we get it into the policymakers? And they have a way of assessing their decisions, in other words, that based on a very low level of information, a low level frequency, when in fact, Mary's going to talk about multidimensional biological links to DNA. And this information, again, when she gets back online and whether or not we can get as much into this program as I want to, we'll have her back on if we need to. We need to get this information, amazing information, to awaken and charge with the sense of responsibility to it, to our decision makers. I'm kind of emphasizing that to an obnoxious degree because what I see has happened in the past is new information has gotten out to certain communities, and that's probably where we are in the phase of our own evolutionary process of humanity. But now we're at a pivotal point in history. And we are either going to continue the suffering and destruction, and that will lead to some real catastrophes, man-made or natural disasters that are not going to receive the amount of or the quality of correction that needs to be made, or we're going to have the biggest world peace celebration in recorded history, and that's going to actually manifest itself into solutions for all the human needs that we know about and for all the environmental needs that we have right now to correct, and also for new energy so we don't have to continue to deplete the resources on this planet. And as we humans evolve into space, if we will, and we will, start to mine the moon and the asteroids, that's human condition kind of thinking. If they're going to do that, if we don't have more information from the ETs given to us, that technology, the dual use of it, some of it, yes, could be taken off the planet to mine the moon and the asteroids, just for an example. Or it could also be used as weapons to dominate and control everyone on everything on Earth and in space from space. Now, there are thousands of satellites up there. We're probably using hundreds of them. And to even do the show, we're bouncing frequency information possibilities, enhancing communication back and forth around the satellites. The fact of the matter is that technology could not only be shut down or harmed, put out of service by the dual use of some piece of technology by some angry leader or decision maker or someone that has access to the technology, or if we can get the human species to rise to the level of the children that Mary has focused on so hard, thousands of them, that is based on a love frequency, then we have a chance. And I believe that we have that slim opportunity right now before, in spite of rumors there are no weapons based on celestial bodies or craft. Before they do that, I believe we have a moment in time when we can support the deal making with Russia and China that would encourage them, which they haven't been encouraged. They're not hearing from us yet, and we should be writing letters right now, especially to President Putin, because he's been announcing two things. One, he's ready to sign a treaty to ban weapons from space, the one that's called, and I can send it to anyone who wants a copy of it.
We're talking about free and what we're doing, which is really completely changing the psychological model or how we view reality. What the premise that we're coming from is what Dr. Rudy Shield calls the quantum hologram theory. And really free is coming from two perspectives. One is changing the psychological model, the 3D model that we're operating from now, in terms of looking at it from a multidimensional perspective, which Dr. Rudy Shield, the astrophysicist, calls the model the holographic quantum reality, so quantum hologram. And from that, then we can understand everything that we experience multidimensionally. That includes such things as intuition, telepathy, clairvoyance, all those abilities that, mediumistic abilities, for example. So through that, that's how we are able to access all this other intuitive knowledge, this awareness, this knowing that everyone experiences, but doesn't know how to quantify it. So what free is really doing, it's got two mandates. It's got the one which is working with the scientists to explore this model of this broader version or perspective or model of reality, which is the quantum hologram perspective of looking at how we interact with our reality or realities, which, you know, we term as multidimensional, but also looking at a new psychological model, because at the moment, you know, we're taught unless we can touch it, feel it, see it, smell it, for example, anything else isn't real. And that's been the problem with the psychological model, and why so many people with these experiences struggle, because they're told that you can't trust that. That's not safe to, you know, to experience that, or to, how can you possibly have a knowing of a past life, for example? How can you possibly, you know, experience an out-of-body experience or whatever, when in fact in the quantum hologram theory, it's all explainable. And this is what we're trying to do with free, is to give this a name, to give it a, if you like, a forum to explore. And through this, we've already worked with over 2,300 individuals, and it's all, you know, anonymous. But basically, the surveys go into gradual, even more depth in terms of how people understand their reality or their experiences, or how they understand their experiences. So this is the very first time any organization has done such an in-depth and very credible academic survey on this whole phenomena. So it goes into the conscious awareness of the individual, how they understand themselves, how they've understood their experiences. And remember, this is the conscious information that they have, or that, you know, they understand about the beings that they've interacted with, etc. And what has come from that is a completely different picture to what the media and, you know, popular understanding of this experience is, which is, you know, that people only, you know, generally see greys or reptilians and all the nasties, and they're cruel to them, etc. That this is not profoundly traumatic, which in some cases it certainly can be. But what we've discovered is ultimately there's been an amazing shift in consciousness through this experience, whether it's been difficult or traumatic, or whether in fact it's been very, very loving. And, you know, what people don't understand is a lot of this memory is conscious. It isn't necessarily only discovered through hypnosis, for example, and certainly with the children. It is conscious with them. And, you know, some of the results have been incredible. For example, we found out of the survey we've done so far that 75% of experiencers have viewed their contact experiences as positive. 85% who have undergone major transformations of the positive, including being more spiritual, less egotistical, more concerned for the environment, less concern for monetary values, for example. In other words, a complete shift in awareness, consciousness, and understanding of themselves. They become more loving, more centered on feeling connected to everything around them, the planet, and there is a completely different way of them wanting to interact with their fellow humans. They become less materialistic, for example. Many of them get involved in healing and what have you. And what another really significant point is that 50% of them have recalled where they have been healed on board craft. Major healing in some cases, and profoundly changing them from that level as well. They've also found that they've been protected. Sometimes when there's been a possibility of a fatal accident, somehow some anomalous thing happens where they seem to have been looked after or protected and not known how. Somehow they weren't fatally injured or whatever. So there is a real sense that those connected to these different beings, whether they call them their guides, their angels, they may call them their extraterrestrial friends. The children have often called them their spirit guides, or they'll talk to them about their teachers, or they may even say, as one young lady spoke to me, a little 8-year-old, called them her fairies. And her fairies, she says, take her to other planets, and one of the planets is where she comes from, which is home. And she describes the animals there, she describes the planet there, for example, and whatever. So, in that sense, you've got these different, whether you call them star visitors, extraterrestrials, non-human intelligences. I think, that often depends on how you're viewing them and the lens which you wish to view them. Ultimately, have been, as I say, for most people, and that's a huge percentage, 85% of 2,300 survey so far said that this was life-changing and transformative. So what is, this is information that has never been put out publicly before, but it's done with all the academic protocols. Dr. John Climo is a former professor of psychology, and we've got, Dr. Bob Davis, who's a neuroscientist, again, a former professor of neuroscience. These are heading that team. So, in that sense, we have got the credentials behind it. We've got the information collated that is giving us a completely different picture of what extraterrestrial, interdimensional contact, whichever way you want to look at it, is manifesting. And it comes in a way that may be through a shamanic experience. It may be through having a near-death experience or a profound grief experience, maybe that catalyst. And talking about profound grief as being the catalyst, one of the accounts in my book is an MD, a GP in Melbourne, who, through the death of her son, really started her, if you like, on the journey of waking up to her own experiences and her own mission, which is to actually help with all this activation that we're talking about, where she believes, and many others believe, that we are only using a certain percentage of our DNA, and that certain percentage now is being, that we're not using, is being activated. The scientists, the geneticists used to call it junk DNA. They didn't understand what 90% of it was. But we now, from the research that I've done and from the understanding that I'm gaining regarding the anomalies in human DNA, and we've got 223 genes in our DNA that they still can't, nobody can really explain as a sideways insertion of genetic material, that is all to do with higher psychological functioning, and no other species on the planet has got these 223 genes, which is really, that in itself is extraordinary in my view. And, I was told by someone who worked with Dr. Francis Crick, who also said, and he was quite clear in his book, Life Itself, he said that he believed that we were, if you like, genetically engineered, that our ancestors' spacecraft. He was quite clear on that subject. And of course, there have been whistleblower geneticists that say it is without doubt we have been altered, spliced, and it's all there in the genetic code that there has been splicing going on, that we have been intelligently designed. And then when you get, children under 10 that are telling you that they are shown on craft, on planets, there are beings that do this genetic engineering. And I was talking to this 8-year-old who told me quite clearly that when she was on the craft, she was taken to a planet and she was shown how they mix genetics, humans with other species, with animals, and even plants. So she was actually shown genetic modification, and that was her words. And this is an 8-year-old that's telling me what she's been shown on the craft. So when you get children that have never, ever been, exposed to this, they don't watch talk shows, they don't read books on this, coming out with complex information as this, saying that this is what they're being taught or being shown for various reasons, or educated in everything from quantum physics to some of the what I call the syllabus is, the nonlinear nature of space-time, the awareness and connection to sentient life, levitation, understanding spatial geometry of thought, how to operate in a multidimensional reality, states of consciousness, how to communicate and interpret and interact with interdimensional beings, telepathy, mind melds, healing, etc. This is exactly what the children are talking about. But the adults of these children are the ones that are telling us that they are changed by their experiences in an extremely, overwhelmingly positive way, even if they had had traumatic experiences to begin with. There is a very much, I believe, a modern day shamanic kind of wake-up call here. And I feel in a way it is, because the parallels between shamanism and abductions are very, very similar. And I participated in a research study that actually shows the parallels.
This is fantastic. There's a state of ego that seems to have taken over. And I wonder if you could address that as we're being taught by our non-physical friends what's going on, or as we will be if we can get the portals open to get that information, again, to the leaders and decision makers.
I think the most important thing here is to understand that when it is accepted that we need a new form of environment for the children coming in, are coming in with awareness that is way beyond most of us. When I was talking to a 16-year-old who was explaining to me the nature of reality, and I remember thinking very humbly that it took me to get to 60 years old to understand what that 16-year-old was telling me. It was very, very humbling. What we have to understand is these schools will be where they teach us what we need to know. And primarily our role in that will be to support them and nurture them through, their physical human growing up, if you like. But they will be teaching us what they need to manifest or to be everything that they've come here to be. They come in with abilities. They come in with a mission, and they'll talk about that mission. When I spoke to one 8-year-old that told me that he could communicate with animals, and I said, what is it that you've come to bring? And he said, I've come to teach people how to understand animals, how to treat them, and how to understand their nature. And so for him, it was very much about us understanding the consciousness of all the creatures on the planet, for example. I have others that feel that they've come here to work with energies and healing. An 8-year-old saying that she could do healing. I had another young lady recently tell me, all of 8 or 9 years old, that she worked with the elements, and the elements being, for example, the wind and the clouds, that she actually can affect them. Now, we're talking here about concepts that most of us find absolutely extraordinary, but yet the children quite naturally talk about this.
Well, we're going to hear more about what they're talking about and much more during the next segment of the show. Thank you so much. Stay with us.
Welcome to the world's meeting place. I like very much
radio.
You're an American institution.
American Freedom Radio.
We want the peace on earth and in space. We're not alone.
Welcome back to the Carol Rosin Show, second segment with Mary Rodwell about the new human. Wow. This is so much information for us to incorporate, but I'm really interested in especially the DNA part that you mentioned we've been reprogrammed. I want to hear more about that and frequencies related to it. And then I wonder how we deal with our decision makers like candidates as we're writing policy statements for them when they're still in the 3D world and they have a DNA from that earthbound frequency. How do we move forward in writing policy? What can we tell them that might help them open up or change their frequency, can we reprogram our leaders? Go ahead.
Well, I think that we are actually being helped on many levels with the shift in frequency. And the reason that we're being helped is exactly part of this whole upgrade of our evolution and our species. Dr. Olson talks about low frequency people and high frequency people. And she was talking about, if you want to stay in the low frequency, you stay in your 3D world. You eat all the rubbish food and you continue to watch television. Mm-hmm. If you want to go into a higher frequency, you completely shift your diet. You start looking at really healthy, foods. You're bringing your thoughts to a different level of awareness as well. That means, many people who either meditate or whatever, for those that that are being drawn into greater awareness, for example, or start exploring more of their intuitive awareness, their multidimensional awareness, becoming more spiritual. Your frequency then starts to shift. But with that is the children themselves. They're bringing in the frequencies. So if you've got one of them in your family, then you're going to be connecting to that frequency as well, because they're bringing all of these different frequencies. But we're also, I believe there are scientists now, Mitch Batras is one of them, and Solar Rain talks about the sun cycle changing and that we're getting frequencies, new frequencies coming from the sun and from the galactic center that are being literally affecting not only the planet, but affecting us biologically as well. And when you tie that in to some of the understanding that we have from Russian scientists, and I quote them many, many times, and I'm actually looking for the so I actually get their name correct. But these Russian scientists are actually telling us that that DNA can be altered by human language. It only requires the right language. So in other words, rather than surgically splicing and changing DNA, if we use the right frequency, we can actually alter the nature and configuration of DNA. And from that, and I can give you the links to that if anyone wants it in a minute, but what I want to say with that is when I have someone coming to me saying they're working, as a healer, and they're working with frequencies, they're bringing in frequencies from mantras, for example, or what many are manifesting, and this is another incredible part of this, is what we call star languages or light language. And many people now are finding spontaneously coming out with these languages that feel very familiar to them. Some of them have no idea why they'll suddenly start coming out with these languages. They say that they feel like they're from home. They can be very, very emotional. And what is fascinating is it's almost like when your frequency changes, you're tapping in to another part of who you are. And for some, they believe that they're tapping in to their origins, whether or not it's the Pleiades or Sirius or one of these other star systems. And it's almost like they're tapping into that memory and those frequencies of where they're from, bringing that in their healing. And they were saying that they're using these frequencies to heal people. And with that, also helping the person that they're healing connect to that part of themselves. So they're bringing in it that way. And the MD that I've written about in chapter 20, Dr. Batchelor, is actually someone doing this. She found that she was not only coming out with mantras but also speaking these light languages, as she calls them. And she said, and these are the frequencies that are altering DNA. And, when you understand this, there is a science behind this. The Russian scientists themselves, Gurdjieff, and it's a book called, it's gone right out of my head. I'll tell you about it in a minute. But they've written a book on this, about how, working with linguists and other scientists in Russia, they have discovered that using certain frequencies will, without question, change the nature of DNA. But they've also discovered that DNA has the ability, if you like, to tap into the quantum hologram. In other words, it creates miniature wormholes into other parts, into, if you like, the quantum reality. In that way is how we actually access our intuition, our clairvoyance, all those multidimensional abilities are coming through the holographic nature of DNA.
Would you explain that a little bit more now for people who are not familiar at all with the idea of multidimensions, of quantum holograms, that reality? That really is important.
Well, I'm not a physicist, and I can only put it as simply as I can understand it.
That's all we need.
As long as you're okay with that. What I've understood, and I will actually mention it, I've got it, it's called Networked Intelligence, von Greisner-Fozar and Franz Bludhoff. Actually, this is what they say. DNA is not just responsible for the construction of our body, but as a data storage, which in communication follows the same rules as language and just requires the right frequencies to be reprogrammed. Living chromosomes function like a holographic computer using endogenous DNA laser radiation, are able to modulate certain frequency patterns onto laser ray and influence the DNA frequency and thus the genetic information itself. Esoteric and spiritual teachers have known our body is programmable by language, words, and thought. Now it's been scientifically proven and explained. DNA follows the regular grammar and has set rules just like human language. They conclude human languages did not appear coincidentally, but are a reflection of our inherent DNA. This means human language will interact with living DNA substance. They react to language modulated laser rays, and if the proper frequencies are used, and that is why affirmations and hypnosis can have such a powerful effect on human bodies. And this is why we're so affected by what is said to us, both positive and negative. So there you have it in encapsulating. DNA has many, many properties that we're only just beginning to understand. And one of the most amazing things is that 1 small gram of DNA can contain terabytes of information. This is something else we have to understand in terms of our DNA itself. And if we go on what we're being taught by whistleblowers and by various other experiences, is that we are perhaps a combination not only of the indigenous species on this planet, but also perhaps as many as 12 different other extraterrestrial species. So this is all part of human DNA. Some of it is activated, some of it is not. But what I am being told and what my research is suggesting is the frequencies to activate that are happening. And they're happening now more exponentially. And they're coming in with the new humans, the new Homo noeticus that I was told were coming in from 2000. And they are coming in to, if you like, be the catalyst for the rest of the older models, as I call myself, and, our generations, if you like, to actually, so we can start to access more of who we really are. In other words, to wake up, to be activated into, the new human, or if you like.
I want to tell everybody to throw out their Prozac and their depression therapy, because if people can begin to understand what you're talking about, what I'm hearing from you is that we really have a chance to survive where a lot of people don't. The suicides that you mentioned that are taking place, including among the children that are misdiagnosed all the time. As I've worked in the field of child psychology and as an educator, that a lot of the children that I experienced that I thought were actually advanced were misdiagnosed and put on drugs again to keep them down and stupid. But what actually I hear you saying now is that the whistleblowers, the people that are coming in, hopefully fast enough. When I say that in terms of our survival, because we could be erased in the blink of an eye or in the near future, as some of the scientists say, and the very solid reports that they have about what's actually going on the planet that's destroying our environment, that's already happened, actually, as Guy McPherson would say. These catalysts that you're talking about then could be the key to the pivot of the course of history. Am I right about this? Is there a chance that this is actually the DNA facts that you're bringing out, the networking of the intelligence, the language, words, and thoughts? Is this actually going to, do you feel, or do you hear from the children, the people you're interviewing, that this is what's necessary to be happening now to save us? Do you hear anything like that coming out of them?
Absolutely. And, what is compelling for me and has been, and why, a number of chapters are focusing on what the children are saying, is because they are saying, look, we know we've come in with a mission. We know we've come here to help. We know it's going to be difficult. They are quite aware of the challenges that they've come in for. But they also know that they're being supported by their family, because many of them will say, I just want to go home. And the mother will say, what do you mean? You are home? No, I'm not. My real home. This is the awareness of their connection to their non-human family, if you like, wherever the origin may be. But they know that they've come in to make a difference, and it may be ecologically. I'm speaking. I've got one chapter on a young 17-year-old. He calls himself an ambassador from Arcturus, and he's explaining that he's come in as an ecological engineer. He's come to change the way that we build, on our planet, how we will build ecologically places to live that are in harmony with the planet. This is part of his mandate, and how he explains his mandate. I talked to a 16-year-old who told me that he could build interstellar craft. And I said to him, well, how do you know how to do this? Was this a download from, the beings that you interact with or whatever? And he said, oh, no. He said, this is past life memory. When I was on Mars, I used to build them. And he said, but I've brought that information in with me. But I've also come just to be so that I, when people come to me or want help, that I can help them. So they know they've come in to help each other, but they also know they've come in with specific purposes to bring in new technologies, to bring in new awareness, to show us, if you like, what we can do. Because the one thing the 9-year-old in Europe told me, I call her Kathy, she said to me, human beings are incredibly amazing, Mary. She said, but the trouble is they have to believe it first.
Wow. Do you think yourself that you came in with a mission? I mean, I clearly do, because my whole life keeps leading up to and getting saved from different bad circumstances to doing what I'm doing. And I think now we're at the point where, with information like what you're bringing in, we can actually pivot the course of history. If we can, and I guess it is tapping, because it is the frequency that we're talking about, that whether we aim it directly or not is going to hopefully impact the decision makers who otherwise are taking us into some really destructive three-dimensional war scenes and health or anti-health scenes. I think now, I'm wondering now if you feel that you came in with a mission to get this information out, you yourself.
I would say honestly now that I think my life has led to this point, and it's only when you reflect and you go through your life story, as it were, that you see those pivotal points where you were led in a certain direction. I think that my medical training, was very, very important, but it was interesting that I got led into going from the mechanical way of healing, as I call the general way of dealing with human biological systems, into the psychological healing, which is counseling. From that, going into work with hypnosis, and then working with past lives, and seeing the connection between everything from the soul journey, which is the spiritual side of ourselves, right down to the emotional and physical. And when you get to that point, you start to broaden out your perspective. And I found that the synchronous, if you like, the synchronicity of reading 2 books on this prior to my first client was fascinating. One was the book by Dr. John Mack, Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, a former professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, and Communion, which was Whitley Strieber's book. And those 2 I read out of curiosity, because I've always had one of these kinds of, my mind is always been curious about life. It's always wanted to know the bigger questions. Why are we here? What's it all about? Whatever, to lead me to a point of being exposed to this broad, incredibly complex phenomena, which to me makes more sense than anything I learned at school. And there's that sense of knowing that this is true, this is real, this is how it is, and this is what all my clients ultimately find themselves doing. Is doesn't matter what they're told from outside, in the 3D world. This is the reality. This is their experience. And that the thing that breaks my heart, Carol, more than anything, is knowing that there has been this huge discrimination against personal reality on this planet, which, doesn't happen in indigenous societies at all. They are very honoring of someone's abilities and awareness and intuition. And yet we find it, it's treated with ridicule, or it's treated through medicine. You are an aberration, let's stick some Prozac down your face, or whatever it is. When, what is horrendous is we are medicating the very people that are bringing this new evolutionary process into, our reality, and to make this world a better place. Ironic, isn't it?
And medicating and ridiculing and putting them away in prisons and locking them out of being able to function freely in society. Yes, it's pathetic to me. And it's kind of what makes me I've been saying lately that I want to become a recluse. I just want to get away from humans, because I feel that Thomas Jefferson quote that was in the show 1776 all the time, this still rings in my ears. Is anybody there? Does anybody care? Does anybody see what I see? And having done this work like you, in my case, for over 40 years, day and night, trying to just prevent the placement of weapons in space so that the portals can open up and will open up to more people being able to experience openly, officially, the information and the experience, the loving experience from the ETs, without the dogma and the influences that we've had that make us doubt and fear and interpret, perceive from certain belief systems, the negative parts of it, which now I'm seeing in the new information coming out seems to be very positive, mostly positive anyway. And I think more and more people are waking up to that higher, the love frequency. I hope my friends that are listening from the defense industry are able to relate to this language. Because I think some of the people that I've met along the way, I'm sure you have, who are in the military-industrial complex, actually also, if they would get into their quiet, realize that they came here with a mission. I really hope that what you're saying will tap them. And I hope that they're not being medicated so that they can hear it. So, yes, I do understand this, and thank you for your personal part of this, too. So now you have brought in a lot more research about what the children, some of their stories, and some of the research of the thousands of people that have now clued into the free organization. I guess you put out the questionnaires for it, which I know Edgar Mitchell wanted me to get involved in. I'd like to hear more about the research, the evidence that you have that proves that we're not alone, that we have a lot to learn, that there is a different frequency of consciousness that is evolving more and more and faster. And I think we hear it in any walk of life with any issue that we're working on, any issue, the many issues of concern people are working on, and that can bring back, maybe help us bring back the memories that we have. I'd like to hear more, if you would, share about some of the experiences among the people that you have been able to touch, or have been able to touch you with their experiences and information.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is it's everywhere, and I'm often asked which are the most compelling. There are so many that are absolutely compelling. But let me take you through, one of the older generations before I get to the younger generations, just to show that this has been, it's exponential, but it's certainly been happening, with 70, 80-year-olds as well. And to give you an example of that, I was in Norway recently speaking in Scandinavia, and I know that in Scandinavia this is still even more difficult to talk about than in a lot of other countries. For some reason, they find it even more extraordinarily hard to accept multidimensional awareness. And it was profound for me because I gave my presentation, which was talking about light languages, symbols, the children being telepathic, etc., and all the kinds of things that they are getting downloads, etc. And I was a bit concerned about speaking about it, not knowing what the response would be. The response blew me away in the sense that many in the audience were in tears, and one of them was a lady that came up to me and she said, "Look, I'm 79 years old. Everything that you've spoken about," she said, "is me. And I've never heard anyone else mention this before. I thought there was something wrong with me. And yet everything you're saying," she said, "is exactly my experience." And I mean, she's 79 years old. And she explained to me that she was a farmer's wife and that she used to speak to the sheep in her mind to bring them in. And nobody knew how she managed to bring the sheep in. And she said, "I always did it through my mind and they never knew how I did it." She explained to me through a number of emails later, after this revelation to her, that she wasn't the only one, which was so healing in itself. And she explained a really interesting experience where she was really feeling very uncomfortable being in a big shopping mall. Many people with sensitivities that are the new humans find it very difficult being in crowded places. They can't cope with the energy of it and picking up energy. And she said, so I pulled myself into a space where I just wasn't affected. And then she said, I was in the shop and she said, and everyone was getting served but me, and I didn't know why. And at the end of it, she said, I suddenly realized when I got angry, they weren't dealing with me, that they couldn't see me. And when she got angry, she actually manifested again. So she said they could actually see me then. And she realized it was because she'd shut herself into such a space that she'd more or less made herself invisible. Now, this is a 79-year-old. I get a 66-year-old that has she's got a chronic back problem. She explains that she was on morphine some of the time. She knew that it was degenerative, that she would end up in a wheelchair. Overnight, she had an experience where she had a sense of levitation. I did the regression with her about her wanting to know what happened, because all of a sudden, she's no longer got the back problem. She's barely needing any medication. And the interesting thing was that when we discovered why she was suddenly well, and not only well, that her intelligence quota had been upgraded, because she's now dialoguing with scientists on a whole things like GMOs, chemtrails, things that she has not been educated into. But she's now dialoguing with scientists. And not only that, she was in her regression, she found out she'd been taken to her home planet, that she'd been told it's now time. We are going to, you've got a job to do, and we're going to make sure that you can do it. She was 66 when this experience came. She's now 69. She says, I've got more energy than when I was half my age, Mary. And she said, and I have this information now that I can literally talk to scientists, and I've not been trained in any of it. This was, and the interesting thing was that we talk about the scripts that many people find themselves writing, these strange hieroglyphs, for example. She was shown these on a spacecraft as a kind of communication, which is another part of this experience. So this is a 69-year-old doing her mission now, which has been started literally in the last couple of years. And that's the important thing, is that people are waking up across this planet now, and a lot of it has happened in the last few years. And I do think there is something very significant in what that's telling us.
Fantastic. I think we ought to make up a new degree that is not based on the old PhD John Lilly, who communicated with the dolphins, you may know, an old friend of mine, he used to say, Carol, even though before I had my honorary doctorate, you're a doctor because you do science, and we should be giving everyone who is developing an issue, an expertise in an issue, or a message coming out of the issue, like you just mentioned with GMOs, chemtrails, different ways of healing, alternative healing methods and technologies, that we should call them all doctors so they get respected. And by the way, I got to testify before the Senate Armed Services Committee and in the House Congress with my honorary doctorate. I don't think they ever checked to see that it wasn't a PhD. It's an honorary doctorate that I got in Africa for doing third world country work. And it was official, but it was a big celebration and so on. But usually it's a PhD requirement. Now, a lot of people have honorary doctorates, and I think you should come up, or we should come up with a new degree to give people so that maybe that will help in the transition of people being able to hear what's going on. And the indigenous work that you mentioned, we have an advisor to President Morales listening in today. In Bolivia, the only indigenous president that we have on the planet. I hope that people will tune in more to that consciousness too, and the awareness of what they know that has been left out. We do acknowledge that, by the way, in the treaty, the Russians and Chinese did in the treaty to prevent the placement of weapons in space. Again, people can read that on the website, peaceandspace.com, or write to me at spacetreaty@gmail.com. I'd like to ask you what you know. Have people talked about their communication with the animals? We see so many YouTubes, wonderful YouTubes about animals communicating with each other, elephants that were just connected after 4 years of being apart, and they remember each other, feed each other. And how does this work? Because a statement that I was given in one of my contacts was children and other animals. I used to say it that way. Children and other animals are what we're doing this work for. Do you hear people talking about that context of different forms of life on this planet, which so many are not respecting? So I hear all the time, then how can we have any consciousness and respect for the off-planet cultures, especially if they appear in physical form? How does this relate to the animal communication, telepathic, and so on?
I think that we are actually being prepared to become telepathic again. I think some of us are all, some of the children certainly are. And what that means, and the shamanic sides of the indigenous peoples, where they, as a shaman, would go into the consciousness, for example, of an animal or whatever. An indication of that I'll go into 2 points here. One of them is that many of the children say they communicate with animals as well. And like the 8-year-old that told me that, that was his mission, was to get people to have respect for animals and to understand it. So it's just, we're talking about a different frequency. They know how to interface with different frequencies because they have the ability to do that. This is part of their multidimensional awareness, even to the point of, plants as well, because we know that plants do respond. That's already, the Life of Plants was a wonderful book where they put a polygraph attached to a particular plant and sent emotions towards it, and it reacted to that. So what we're understanding is we are actually connecting to everything, which is what the indigenous peoples already knew and already know how to do this. We talk about animal whisperers, don't we, and what have you. I think we've just got to realize that the ability is there within all of us. And it's just that we've often been, again, we've been conditioned or programmed out of a lot of this kind of awareness. And to give you an example of one way this happens too is a 12-year-old was speaking to his father, not only that he came from Andromeda and his last parent was a blue-skinned being, for example, and he was explaining that. He just said, Dad, when you're on the computer at work and you're doing certain things on the computer, and he said, one of those things that when I'm seeing it through your eyes, he said, is you're doing this particular configuration. He says, what are you doing when you do that? And of course, you can imagine what the father was saying, thought of that his son was actually able to interact with his consciousness and actually see something visually on a screen that his father was working on at work. I mean, this is what we're talking about. We have not yet even begun to understand where this potential will take us. But one of the things I will say is These children know when something's truthful, and they know when they're being lied to. And they will know not only by the frequency, but what they're picking up. So all I'm saying to those in higher authorities that are on this planet that think you can con these children, let me tell you, it isn't going to be possible. You are really going to have to clean up your thoughts, and you're going to have to clean up your intentions and your motives, because these kids will know. They will know. And, you know, this is really teaching us as a species to start walking our talk. If we're, you know, one of these teachers in love or spirituality, you're going to have to walk your talk, because otherwise they are going to know. And this is what I mean.
This is fantastic, because what you're getting at is the truth that needs to be known. That's what I think that your advanced degree should be in, is just truth-telling. It's not even whistleblowing anymore. It's beyond that. And it ties in with what the people's missions are that so many people seem to be waking up to. One of the things that I hear coming out of the fear community, especially in exopolitics and ufology groups, is we don't know what their agenda is. I mean, to me, it's so obvious we're still here, so duh, you know, that's what their agenda is what you're describing. But how do you relate to that fear factor that continually gets brought in, that builds into more enemy viewpoints and may even stretch into, if we're not careful, a form of manipulation, not just genetic manipulation, but that included manipulation of the minds that could, again, continue to block this information? I'm hoping that what you're saying is in such a high frequency that it maybe can't be blocked, but you know there are always people working on the blocks and the fear and the self-interest that stop this kind of information, as well as the applications of the, what Von Braun would say, the extension of the mind technology can be used for. How do you deal with that? We don't know what the agenda is, fear factors, the blocks that come in, the threats, all of those factors.
Well, I'm going to take it to the, what I call the top of the tree here. And I'm talking about the soul journey, and that we're in a duality. And I believe as a soul, we've come in to experience that duality. And fear is part of that. And so for some of us, I think the soul agenda has been to experience what it's like to be fearful, but to transcend it, to transcend the human fears. And that's what why I call the UFO experience a modern day shamanic experience, because the shaman has to transcend their fears to become a true shaman. They have to transcend their human fears to become truly multidimensional. And so what we're really doing here is the same thing. For some people, the soul journey is to transcend the fear factor that is so prevalent on this planet. It's a fear energy that goes through everything. You've got to be afraid of illness. You've got to be afraid of terrorists. You've got to be afraid of everything that, they bring up everything possible from illness to whatever. Now, the soul itself may choose to experience that for a time. But what is interesting, when I was speaking to this 16-year-old, and the wisdom that came from him was amazing. He said, Mary, people will choose the reality they wish to experience. And if they wish to experience at this time that this is how it is, that is what they will manifest. So this is our choice. This is always our choice to, what is it that, that our soul wishes to experience and understand and also transcend, because everything is about ultimately transcending fear and being all that we can be, but we have to believe it first. So that's part of the journey, and everyone will have a different journey on that. That's why I believe certain people have a really traumatic wake-up call, and others will have a very gentle one, because this time the soul journey for them is this. So it's really about what you think and what you believe. So it's up to you. So if you believe X, Y, and Z is going to get you, well, you may just experience that, because that's part of the journey. But I can only do it from that perspective of understanding why, we all have such a variety of different experiences on this planet. We've come in with a mandate, which is the human experience, and then we come in with the soul mandate, which is we've come to assist this planet to evolve. And through that, we may need to experience a certain thing, for example. To give you an example of that, Niara Isley is a book I wrote the foreword for, and it's Embracing the Shadow, Facing the Shadow, Embracing the Light, where she had MyLab experiences. And it was only later that she realized the reason she'd gone through that experience when she connected to her star family was by experiencing it. She was able to write about it and expose it. So sometimes people go through one of these experiences so that they can experience, understand it, and either support others or expose it. So there's always a reason why certain things occur. So if you're drawn to something and you get in, involve yourself in it into the point where you're swimming in it, well, you're then part of that frequency. So the important thing is to be knowledgeable, to understand it, but don't allow yourself to be focused and absorbed in it. Know that you are greater than that. And this is part of the soul journey. That's how I understand it. But I think, it is very complex. And it is about how ultimately we choose to perceive our experience on this planet and our reality.
Well, that makes me wonder if some of the people I'm working with, a couple of them have been listening to this show because they choose to be looking at the fear, looking from a fear perspective or even a religious belief system of some kind, a carefully taught perspective or interpretation of what's actually going on. So they see Putin is the enemy. Well, yeah, I've been to Russia over 30 times, and a lot of what I was told was not true. Not that any of the leaders are perfect, but certainly coming out with a treaty to ban or to prevent the placement of weapons in outer space is relative. I hope people will read this treaty and maybe write letters to Putin so that he starts to see there's support for this, because to me, that treaty, which Paul Hellyer, the former Minister of Defense of Canada, whom we've had on the show, has said is the most important document of our time, it addresses what you're talking about and makes a reality out of the cosmic cultures. And we have teams of people, I won't take time to go into, that have worked on all of these issues. But the choices that are being made in the complex are so dangerous right now. So I'm wondering, is there a how-to? I know that you've produced a collection, at least I think you have, of meditation and relaxation CDs or tapes, right? How can people work towards or recommend certain techniques that the shamans would teach us if people were lucky enough to be able to have a shamanic experience? What are the how-tos to this transformation?
I mean, that's a really important one. And what it really is saying is that you need to want it first, that you need to have the intent to change, to grow, to expand, because that in itself will then be offered to you from a multidimensional side of yourself. Your teacher self, that inner knowing, will guide you to whatever it is that will be for you. For some people, it may be shamanic practices. For others, it may be meditation and relaxation. It may be yoga, for example. All of those ways put you in touch with your multidimensional nature. One of the ways that I explain to people who want to open up more of their, what I call the right brain, intuitive, creative, connected to the universe matrix, if you like, is that our left brain is great for 3D reality. In other words, it's our analytical, logical side of ourselves that allows us to operate in this tangible material world. So we think first before we speak. But when we are tapping into our multidimensional nature, you're actually getting information before you think. In other words, it appears, it comes as insights, it comes in a knowing. You may just go into a really relaxed state and find yourself coming up with some really fascinating concept. What you're doing, especially if you have the intent behind it, is you're pulling out of that consciousness, that collective consciousness that we all are interacting with, what you need. I'm sure many of you are aware that, how things synchronistically appear when you are particularly focused on a particular subject or a particular bit of information. All of a sudden, everything you're looking at seems to be showing you the same thing. It really is that easy. None of this is complex, because we all have the ability to attract to us what we're ready for. But, you've got to be ready for it. You've got to want it, because it's all about intent. You're putting out that frequency. It's all about frequency, ultimately, I believe. That, we are actually not physical. We're a frequency. We only look solid because we're all operating on the same frequency, so we can see one another. The reason you can't see ghosts and spirits and a lot of the ETs is because they're just operating on a different frequency. You know, we only see one small part of the visual spectrum. You know, what these new children and more aware souls can see, you know, like clairvoyants and mediums, they're just seeing a broader frequency, if you like, than the average person. So really, it's about intent. It's about you wanting it. And that's what you're putting out. But if you're only saying it and you don't mean it, you're not going to get there. So this is about walking your talk. And this is what I think these extraterrestrial intelligences are showing us. We can't just say, you know, we can't just verbalize this. You know, we can't be, I hate to say this, a politician and say everything we don't mean. We actually have to mean it and believe it and walk it. One of the interesting things to me was a lady writing about her 3-year-old daughter, and she said she's absolutely telepathic. She reads my thoughts, but that she also reads the thoughts of everyone around us. And it's getting really hard for me, she said, because sometimes it's really hard to monitor my thoughts because I know my daughter's going to pick up on them, and they're not always the best thoughts for her to pick up on. What she's being taught is your thinking. What's your thinking? What are you actually putting out there into the matrix? This is what we're being taught now. To really be who we want to be, we have to walk the talk.
This is fantastic, because that is not what's happening in the field of politics that I've been following for the last 40-some years. Is a lot of what you just said. It's a lot of people talking, not walking their talk. So I'm really looking for ways, and thank you for these tools. You know, the tools we had in the 60s, of course, went from LSD to DMT to ketamine to different mushrooms. And we found the frequencies. They were, as Timothy Leary used to say, and Terence McKenna, these were tools. I know people this weekend that are getting ready to do an ayahuasca, which is all plants. It's a plant awakening. I think what you said is relevant. A lot of people put all of those tools down, but for many of us, especially back in the 60s, we were given these tools to help awaken us. And although a lot of us became yuppies and dropped out, there's still many of us working on different issues that came out of that. We knew the word frequency back then, but you describe it in a way that brings in the telepathic part, the intuition part, and the potential that we have for living in peace on this planet and maintaining it in outer space, so that we can build a sustainable community, as Edgar Mitchell would be talking about right now. So I really want to honor you for bringing in that part of the science that doesn't have the language in the three-dimensional world that relates to who we really are in the form of a frequency. I mean, how does an ET come in through the wall for so many of us? You know, so the mission that people have then, to me, is part of the waking up process. And I'd like to, before this session ends, again, please give your contact information so that people who have had these experiences, or who would you like to make contact with you at this stage of your work?
Who would I like to make contact with? Well, I would actually, if I was granted anything at all, I would like to, as you do, talk to world leaders in the sense of, let's start again. Let's tell the truth. Let's tell everyone that they're from the stars, because we are. And from that, let's start saying now we're going to not only honor that we are going to become truly a galactic community, which means that we have got to, first of all, look after ourselves and each other in the way that, you know, you look after your own family, that everyone's family, everyone's part of that Earth family. So let's start looking after them. And from that, we can start really growing and evolving into, you know, our future. Because ultimately, what I'm seeing is there is this discrimination that is not only against personal reality, but to whatever shape or form you might be. How on earth are we going to manage when we get into the galactic community where we have all these different shapes and forms that people are telling me they interact with, from humanoids to energy to, you know, angels to fairies to certain intelligent types of plant beings, some that look like a mix of various different forms, crystalline beings. All of these are what people are interacting with, you know, whether or not it's cat beings, feline beings, lion beings. These are ones that everyone's, you know, that I'm talking to that will explain what they look like and their connection to them. You know, we have got to really start understanding we're all part of this matrix of consciousness. And, you know, we've all been ETs. We've all been, you know, we've come from other places. You know, our origins may be as energy beings, consciousness and other planets. We may have been all different forms. So we've come in human form, but we're all aliens, really. We're all ETs. We're all hybrids, you know. So how about we start again and start to understand that we're all connected. We're all on a human journey, and we want to make this human journey as loving and as productive and as beautiful as it possibly can be. And that means by honoring everyone, looking after everyone, and starting again with looking after this beautiful planet that we've been given as custodians. All of that is what it would be the first beginnings of where I'd like to start.
This is exactly why I didn't have this issue covered in the institute that I founded or any of the speeches or work I did in the past, because I didn't have enough people out there, and now you have thousands, and I want everyone to know that I know there are many people, because I've heard from tens of thousands of people over the years who want to make the change, want to help, what can I do? What can people do to help support your idea? And let's get you to before some world leader audiences, because this is the message. These are the people making the decisions, representing us, and we really have to reach them. Part of it is written in that treaty, and I hope that people will start to draw up the visions and present it to the different leaders in the complex so that it's a positive vision, not a protest anymore. We need to get over that, and uncovering the cover-ups. We've already done all that too. Now let's just keep presenting the truth through truth. And what can people do? What would you tell audiences of the people to do?
First of all, it starts with you. It starts with every single person believing in themselves and walking their talk, and also having the vision for them. If they want to change this planet, they've got to actually put some thought into that, in their own abilities, their own awareness. How can they do something to change things? Because, you know, really and truly amazing what even one person can do, you know. I look at some of the people that have changed our planet, and it just started with them. So really, all of you have got abilities. You've all got awareness. You've all got skills. So use those skills for the benefit not only of yourself, but for your Earth family. That would be the first thing. And with that vision, whatever it is that you're inspired to do, to trust it, to trust that you've come here with something to do, and to do whatever inspires you with that, whatever kind of intuition or sense that you get. Because for me, often it's been following my nose. You know, I don't know how I quite got here, to be honest. All I do is, you know, this seems like a good place to go because it may help somebody here. Often when you're starting thinking outside yourself and you're starting to put yourself into someone else's place, that shifts your awareness immediately. When you look at giving someone a smile and you see how that smile affects someone else, sometimes it's as simple as that. But just being beyond yourself and to thinking beyond yourself, that I think is the first step for everyone. And then from that, where else can I help? What can I do? You know, the sense of being in service to me is part of what I have felt all along. I want to leave this planet in a better place than when I arrived. I want to die on my deathbed knowing that in some way a few people might have been better off because I was around. That will give me something I can take with me into my next adventure, as it were. And that's sort of what I'm asking people to do. First, honor yourself, honor your intuition and your knowing. Put out what you want. Put out to the matrix, to the universe, what you want, and then start putting the steps in to how you can achieve that. That is probably the only thing I can say, because everyone's got different skills and different awareness.
And what would you say that the ET in general, the agenda is?
Well, I think the free survey says it all. That, you know, when you've got almost 90% of people, 85% saying that they have been transformed through their experiences, and this is over 2,000 individuals. We haven't even started globally yet, where we're going to get it translated into all these other languages. That is the beginning, telling us that the ultimate programs have been a shift in human consciousness for the positive. Whether we like it or not, or if you want to believe this or not, that is what it's showing us. You can't deny that. That in the end is what we need to know. We also know that they are doing many other things and not allowing us to blow ourselves up for a start. We already know that from some of the, the fact that they've switched off a lot of the nuclear weapons, for example, and this kind of thing. You just have to look. And why are they bringing in all these children with all these abilities, that, healing abilities, ways to help balance and heal the planet? Why would you bother? If you only want us to be biological fodder at the end of the day, why would you bother to help the humanity evolve if your ultimate agenda is a negative one? It just is illogical. That's all I can say.
And if any of you have heard the last card, the Disclosure Project testimony that I did, you know that Werner von Braun gave us a formula, and it's all happened. What are one war after the other, and the last card would be the, quote, alien threat, but it doesn't exist. It's a lie. So the fact is, if we can come at this from that peace perspective, peace on Earth via peace in space, our recognition of who we really are on this planet that you're describing, that's where the pivot's going to come in. The hope that I hear you talking about is the intent and the action that we can take and that the leaders can take, and those of us who can, even if you just write letters, if you make phone calls, show support to our decision makers for the truth about this issue. And the fact that we are still here, and most important to me, is the fact that there is a peaceful curriculum, a peaceful vision, that this can come out. It is coming out through new arts and music, through literature, through anything that you can produce as well. What's your contact information again?
I think at the moment the website's being reorganized, so I'll give the Facebook, which is obviously facebook.com/acern, acern.com.au. But you'll also get me through free, which is www.experiencer.org is the website for free. So those are the two main ones at the moment, or they can reach me by email, which you have as well, Carol. Those are the main ways.
Do also network this show. It will be posted shortly, probably tomorrow, the next day, on YouTube, so that people can hear about all this extensive research that Mary Rodwell is putting together in her new book that you'll be looking for, The New Human. These are thousands of cases that she has studied, and with teams of people who are presenting her with the information. Remember to tap in, as I want to remind you, to your own telepathic abilities, to your own awakening spiritual awarenesses. We're all going through this right now together. And know that we have non-human, we are ETs, as Mary has said, and we have non-human visitors coming in all the time to many millions of people. So do you consider us to be family with the ETs? Do you consider us to be friends, relationships? Mary, what is your conclusion to who we are in relation to not only the star children coming in, but to our extraterrestrial visitors?
Oh, I will say what the children say, and that's basically their family. When you've got an 8-year-old telling you that he sees the manted beings on the craft and they're his family, and when he dies, he's going back to his manted family. To me, this is exactly what we all have been. And we've come in just in a human container because we've got work to do on this planet. And so there's no us and them. There really isn't. It's just us.
And I feel that way about the people on the planet, too, when we hear about the people who are being called terrorists and so on. There's a reason. There's a terrible frustration that's going on with people who are really suffering and have different belief systems. I think now what we're doing, if we can all tap in, and thank you for your help to do this, to a higher frequency, and remember that we were taught with limits involved, that now we can talk to each other in many dimensional ways. And Mary is presenting to us the evidence for doing that, the amazing ways that we're all awakening to a new way of being that's really just about who we really are.